Jesus heals the blind. He restores the broken. He raises the dead. Everywhere he walks, life flourishes. He is the author of creation, the one who sustains all things by the word of his power. But in the final days of his earthly ministry, just before his crucifixion, Jesus uses his miraculous power to do something entirely different. He uses it to destroy something, and he does not destroy an enemy. He does not banish a demon or overthrow a corrupt ruler. He destroys a tree. The story is recorded in the 11th chapter of Mark. It is the week of Passover. The city of Jerusalem is swelling with thousands of pilgrims. Jesus and his disciples are walking the short distance from the village of Bethany into the city. The text tells us a very human detail. Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves. Then Jesus speaks directly to the tree. He says, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And Mark adds one final, crucial detail. He writes, "And his disciples heard him say it. They heard it, and they remembered it." On the surface, this is one of the most confusing moments in all of the Gospels. It feels entirely out of character. It looks impulsive. If we read it quickly, it almost looks like a moment of petty frustration. A tired, hungry teacher lashing out at an inanimate object because he could not find a morning meal. The confusion only deepens when we read a small, clarifying note that Mark includes in verse 13. Mark writes, "Because it was not the season for figs." That detail complicates the entire scene. Why would the Lord of creation curse a tree for simply acting like a tree? Why pass judgment on a fig tree for being empty when it was not even the season for the harvest? If this is just a story about a hungry traveler, the reaction makes no sense. It feels erratic. It feels unfair. But Jesus does not do erratic things. Every action in his final week is measured. Every footstep is intentional. Every word carries the weight of centuries of biblical history. This was not a moment of sudden anger. This was a deliberate, calculated, prophetic sign. Most people read this passage and see a strange, isolated miracle, a rare display of divine frustration. But Jesus was not just talking to a tree. He was enacting a living parable. He was standing on the stage of biblical history, acting out a warning that the prophets before him had spoken for hundreds of years. The tree was not the actual target of his judgment. The tree was a symbol. It was a mirror held up to a nation, and specifically to a religious system. But to understand why Jesus used a fig tree to deliver the heaviest warning of his ministry, we cannot stay on the side of the road. We have to follow his footsteps. We have to look at what happens immediately after he speaks those words. Because the moment Jesus leaves the barren tree, he walks straight into the heart of Jerusalem, and the building he enters next unlocks the meaning of the entire event. When you read the Gospel of Mark, you begin to notice a pattern. Mark is not just recording history. He is writing theology, and he has a very specific way of telling stories to make sure his readers do not miss his deeper point. Biblical scholars often refer to this technique as the Markan sandwich. It is a literary device called intercalation. Mark begins one story, interrupts it right in the middle with a completely different story, and then goes back to finish the first one. He does this when Jesus goes to heal the daughter of Jairus, interrupting that journey with the story of the woman who touches his garment. He does it with the sending out of the 12 disciples, interrupting their mission with the death of John the Baptist. And he does it here, in chapter 11, with the fig tree and the temple. If we do not see this structure, we will misread the entire sequence of events. We will think Jesus was just frustrated with a tree on Monday morning, and then separately, frustrated with the temple merchants on Monday afternoon. But Mark deliberately binds them together. Look at how the text flows. First, Jesus approaches the fig tree, finds no fruit, and speaks a curse over it. Then, the very next verse says they came to Jerusalem, and Jesus entered the temple courts. He does not just look around. He begins driving out those who were buying and selling. He overturns the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. He stops the commerce. He brings the massive, sprawling religious machinery of the nation to a grinding halt. Then, evening comes, and Jesus and his disciples leave the city. The next morning, as they walk back along the same road, Peter points out the fig tree from the day before. It is completely withered from the roots. The tree is the outer layer of the story. The temple is the center. Mark is using this literary structure to tell us exactly how to interpret the actions of Jesus. The two stories are meant to be read as one. The fig tree and the temple are the exact same thing. When Jesus cursed the fig tree, he was acting out a living parable about the temple system. When he drove the money changers out of the temple courts, he was explaining what the parable meant. From a distance, both the tree and the temple looked incredibly impressive. The fig tree was full of broad, green leaves. It looked vibrant. It looked alive. It advertised that it had something to offer a hungry traveler. The temple in Jerusalem was a magnificent architectural wonder. It was the center of national identity. It was loud with the sounds of sacrifices, rituals, singing, and commerce. It looked like the absolute center of spiritual life on earth. But when Jesus walked up to the tree, he found no fruit. It was all display. It was an illusion of life. And when Jesus walked into the temple, he found the exact same reality. He found endless religious activity. He found noise. He found a very busy schedule of transactions and traditions. But he did not find the fruit God was actually looking for. He found leaves, but no fruit. The cursing of the tree was a prophetic visual aid. Jesus was passing judgment on a religious system that had learned how to look holy without actually being holy. A system that had perfected the appearance of life, but was entirely barren at the center. But this raises a deeper question. Why a fig tree? Jesus could have chosen an olive tree. He could have chosen a grapevine. Both were common in the region. Both were frequently used as symbols. But he deliberately walked up to a fig tree. To understand why Jesus chose this exact plant to deliver the heaviest warning of his ministry, we have to look back centuries before he was born. We have to open the words of the ancient prophets. Jesus did not invent the metaphor of the fig tree on a Monday morning in Jerusalem. He inherited it. For hundreds of years, the prophets of the Hebrew Bible used the fig tree as a mirror to show the nation its own spiritual condition. Israel was an agricultural society. Their understanding of the blessing and judgment of God was intimately tied to the land. When the covenant was kept, the land produced. When the covenant was broken, the land withered. Among all the plants in the region, 3 stood out as primary symbols of the nation: the vine, the olive tree, and the fig tree. But the fig tree held a unique place in prophetic poetry. Listen to the prophet Hosea, writing in the 8th century before Christ. Speaking for God, he says in chapter 9, verse 10, "When I found Israel, it was like finding grapes in the desert. When I saw your ancestors, it was like seeing the early fruit on the fig tree." Notice the imagery. God describes his early relationship with his people as a joyful discovery. Finding them was like finding the first ripe figs of the season. It was a delight. But the nation did not remain faithful. Generations later, as Jerusalem spirals into corruption and injustice, God speaks through the prophet Jeremiah. In chapter 8, verse 13, God declares his judgment on a religious system that has abandoned its heart. He says, "I will take away their harvest. There will be no grapes on the vine. There will be no figs on the tree, and their leaves will wither." A barren fig tree with withered leaves. That is the exact image of a covenant people who have lost their way. And the prophet Micah uses the same language to describe his own heartbreak over the spiritual emptiness of his generation. In chapter 7, verse 1, he cries out, "What misery is mine! I am like one who gathers summer fruit at the gleaning of the vineyard. There is no cluster of grapes to eat, none of the early figs that I crave." The prophets depict God as someone searching the branches of his people, looking for the fruit of righteousness, justice, and mercy, and finding none. When we understand this ancient pattern, the story in the Gospel of Mark completely changes. Jesus is not just a tired traveler lashing out at an inanimate object. He is stepping into the ancient role of the prophets. He is acting out the words of Jeremiah and Micah in real time. He is acting as the Lord of the covenant, walking up to the religious establishment of his day, inspecting the branches and looking for the early fruit. In the ancient world, prophets often did more than speak. They performed sign acts. They acted out their messages using physical objects to make the invisible truth visible. Isaiah walked barefoot. Jeremiah smashed a clay jar. Jesus cursing the fig tree is a prophetic sign act. It is a visual sermon. Anyone in the crowd with an ear for the Hebrew scriptures would have felt a chill go down their spine. They would have known exactly what a barren, withered fig tree meant. It meant that the religious system had failed, and a divine reckoning was standing at the door. Jesus was speaking a language the people of Jerusalem would have instantly recognized. But Mark gives us one more detail. He includes a brief, passing comment about the biology of the tree that feels completely out of place. Most readers skip right past it. But it is the one botanical fact that makes this specific tree the perfect, devastating symbol for what was happening inside the temple walls. Mark chapter 11, verse 13, contains a small phrase that has troubled readers for centuries. Mark writes, "Because it was not the season for figs." If it was not the season, why would Jesus expect to find any? And more importantly, why would he curse the tree for being empty? To answer that, we have to look closely at the botanical reality of fig trees in the land of Israel. In the winter, fig trees lose all their leaves. They stand bare against the sky. But in the early spring, right around the time of the Passover festival, they begin to wake up. Here is the crucial detail. On a healthy fig tree, small, edible buds begin to appear at the exact same time the leaves begin to sprout. Sometimes, these early green buds even appear just before the leaves fully open. They are not the fully ripe, sweet summer figs. Those come months later. But these early spring buds are edible. In the ancient world, they were a common source of food for travelers and the poor. The biological rule of the tree is simple. If a fig tree has leaves, it is supposed to have this early fruit. The two go together. Now, look again at what Mark tells us. Jesus sees a fig tree in the distance. He notices it because it is already in full leaf. It has blossomed early. It stands out on the hillside, covered in broad green foliage. The leaves are making a promise. The tree is broadcasting a message to anyone walking on the road. It is advertising. It is saying, "I am alive, I am healthy, I have fruit." But when Jesus walks up to the branches and looks beneath the foliage, he finds nothing. The text says, he found nothing but leaves. The tree was not just barren, it was deceptive. It was advertising something it did not actually possess. If the tree had been completely bare, still dormant from the winter, Jesus would have simply walked past it. A bare tree in early spring is just a tree waiting for its season. It is honest. But this tree was different. It put on the outward show of life, but it had entirely failed to produce the substance of life. This changes how we read the entire event. Jesus is not punishing a tree for failing to produce a summer harvest in the spring. He is passing judgment on the illusion of life. The problem was not simply that the tree was empty. The problem was the leaves. The leaves created a false reality. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random sequence of events. Jesus acts out an ancient prophetic pattern, using a specific tree that is famous for representing the spiritual health of God's covenant people. And he targets a tree that is full of leaves, but completely empty of fruit. This was not an agricultural lesson. It was a theological diagnosis. Jesus was standing just a short distance from the city of Jerusalem. And as he looked at the deceptive foliage of the fig tree, he was preparing to address the massive stone building he was about to enter. Because when he walked through the gates of the city and stepped into the courts of the temple, he was going to find a religious system doing the exact same thing. The temple was covered in leaves. It was loud. It was crowded. It was incredibly busy. But underneath all the religious activity, something vital was missing. And what Jesus does next shows us exactly what happens when God comes looking for the fruit of the covenant and finds only the noise of a marketplace. Jesus leaves the barren fig tree behind and continues the short walk into Jerusalem. He passes through the city gates and walks directly into the temple courts. This was the center of the Jewish world. During the week of Passover, the Temple Mount would have been packed with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims from all over the known world. When Jesus steps into the outer courtyard, known as the Court of the Gentiles, he is met with a wall of noise. Animals are bleating, coins are clinking, merchants are shouting over each other to sell their goods. It is a massive, sprawling display of religious activity. It is the architectural equivalent of a tree full of broad, green leaves. But Jesus does not join the activity. He stops it. Mark chapter 11 tells us that Jesus began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. He would not even allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. For a brief moment, the entire religious machinery of the nation is brought to a standstill. But we have to be careful here. Many people assume Jesus was angry simply because commerce was happening inside a religious space. But the historical reality is more complex. The people traveling from hundreds of miles away could not bring their own sheep or doves for the Passover sacrifice. They had to buy them when they arrived. And because they came from different regions, they had to exchange their Roman or Greek coins for the specific temple currency in order to pay the annual temple tax. The exchange of money and the selling of animals was entirely necessary for the temple to function. The problem was not just that commerce existed. The problem was where it was happening and what it had become. The market had been set up in the court of the Gentiles. This was the one designated area of the massive temple complex where non-Jews were allowed to come and seek the God of Israel. But the religious leaders had turned the space meant for global prayer into a noisy, chaotic marketplace. They had crowded out the nations. They had prioritized the mechanics of their religious system over the actual human hearts seeking God. And worse, the system had become corrupt. The exchange rates were inflated. The prices for sacrificial doves, the offerings specifically meant for the poorest people, were driven up. The religious system was exploiting the vulnerable in the name of worship. Jesus looks around at the noise, the commerce, and the exploitation, and he quotes two ancient prophets to explain exactly what is happening. He says, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers'?" The first quote is from Isaiah chapter 56. It is the original vision of the temple as a place of fruit, a place where all nations can experience the mercy and presence of God. The second quote is from Jeremiah chapter 7, and it is a devastating critique. A den of robbers is not where thieves do their stealing. It is the safe house where they go to hide after they have committed their crimes. Jesus is saying that the people running the temple are using their religious rituals to hide their lack of justice. They are performing the sacrifices and singing the psalms, but their hearts are completely empty of the mercy God actually desires. Pause for a second and look at the movement. Just a few hours earlier, Jesus walked up to a fig tree that advertised fruit, but only had leaves. Now, he stands in a temple that advertises a relationship with God, but only offers a corrupt religious transaction. The temple is the fig tree, and by overturning the tables, Jesus is doing exactly what he did to the tree. He is passing a prophetic judgment on a system that has the appearance of life, but no actual fruit. When the sun goes down, Jesus and his disciples leave the city and head back toward Bethany. But the story does not end there. Because the next morning, as they walk back along the same road, they pass by the fig tree again. And what Peter notices in the morning light reveals exactly what is going to happen to the temple in Jerusalem. Tuesday morning breaks over the hills outside Jerusalem. Jesus and his disciples are walking the familiar dusty road from the village of Bethany back into the city. As they walk, they pass the exact spot where Jesus had stopped the day before. Peter looks over and suddenly stops. He remembers what happened. He points to the fig tree and says, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." The text in Mark chapter 11, verse 20, gives us one incredibly important detail about what the tree looked like. Mark writes that they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. That phrase is not just a botanical observation. It is a theological statement. If a tree loses its leaves, it can grow them back. If a tree is cut down to a stump, the roots can still hold life. The prophet Isaiah even used the image of a stump to describe how God would preserve a remnant of his people in times of judgment. Pruning is temporary. It is painful, but it is meant to produce more fruit. But this tree was not pruned. It was dead from the roots up. The source of its life had been permanently cut off. It was structural, complete, and final destruction. And because we know the literary structure of Mark, because we know that the tree and the temple are the same thing, this small detail carries massive implications. When Jesus walked into the temple the day before and overturned the tables, he was not just trying to reform the marketplace. He was not trying to improve the accounting practices of the money changers. He was not there to clean up the old system so it could keep running smoothly. He was declaring that the old system's time had run out. The temple had served its purpose in the history of redemption. It was a profound, God-given shadow pointing to a greater reality. It was the localized place where God chose to dwell among his people. But the shadow was never meant to be permanent, and the substance was now standing right in front of them. The leaders of the temple had taken the temporary shadow and turned it into a corrupt, exclusionary system. They had built walls instead of doors. They had created a marketplace that exploited the poor and crowded out the nations. They had grown thick, green leaves of religious performance, but their roots had entirely withered. God was not going to prune the system. He was going to fulfill it, and in doing so, bring the old era to a close. In just a few days, the thick curtain inside the temple, the heavy veil that separated the presence of God from the people, would be torn in two from top to bottom, not repaired, torn. The withered roots of the fig tree were a visual prophecy that the old way of accessing God was ending. A new covenant was arriving. Peter is standing on the road, looking at the dead branches, amazed at the sheer power of what Jesus had done. He is marveling at the miracle. But Jesus does not leave him lingering on the tree. Jesus uses Peter's amazement to deliver one of the most famous and most misunderstood teachings in the entire New Testament. He tells Peter to have faith in God, and then he talks about moving a mountain. For 2,000 years, people have read this teaching as a generic motivational promise about overcoming personal obstacles. But Jesus was not speaking in abstract metaphors. When he spoke about a mountain being thrown into the sea, he was standing in the shadow of a very specific mountain, and the history of that mountain changes the meaning of everything he says next. Peter points at the withered roots of the fig tree. Jesus looks at him and responds with words that have been quoted, printed, and preached for 2,000 years. In Mark chapter 11, verse 22, Jesus says, "Have faith in God." Then he points and says, "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go, throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them." Most people read those words today as a generic promise about personal obstacles. We are taught that the mountain represents a difficult diagnosis, a financial crisis, or a broken relationship. The assumption is that if we can just muster up enough faith, God will move our personal mountains out of the way. That is a comforting thought, and God certainly sustains his people through their deepest struggles. But reading the verse that way entirely misses what Jesus was actually doing in that exact moment. Jesus was not giving a motivational speech about overcoming personal hardship. He was making a specific, devastating prophetic declaration. Remember where they are standing. Jesus and his disciples are walking on the road over the Mount of Olives. Directly across the deep ravine of the Kidron Valley, dominating the entire skyline, is Mount Zion, the Temple Mount. It was a literal mountain, crowned with massive stone retaining walls and gold plating that shined brilliantly in the morning sun. When Jesus says, "this mountain," he is not speaking in abstract metaphors. He is looking directly at the temple. He is pointing to the exact center of the religious establishment, the very system he had just judged the day before, the system represented by the dead, withered roots of the fig tree. He is telling his disciples that this massive, seemingly immovable religious structure is going to be thrown down. In the biblical imagination, the sea often represents chaos, judgment, and unmaking. Standing on the ridges of the Mount of Olives, a person can look east and clearly see the Dead Sea in the distance. It is the lowest, most desolate body of water on earth. Jesus is saying that the corrupt temple system, which looks as permanent as a mountain of stone, is going to be entirely dismantled. But notice what Jesus says immediately after this. In verse 24, he pivots to a new subject. He says, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Why does he suddenly start talking about prayer? Because the day before, he had just condemned the temple for failing to be a house of prayer for all nations. The religious leaders had turned the place of global prayer into an exclusive, corrupt marketplace. They had restricted access to God. They had built thick walls and set up financial toll booths for divine mercy. Jesus is telling his disciples that the old mountain is now obsolete. You no longer have to go through a corrupt system of money changers and animal merchants to reach the ear of the living God. You do not need to stand in a specific stone courtyard in Jerusalem to be heard. The mountain is being removed. The presence of God is no longer contained behind a heavy curtain. The way is open. A new temple is arriving, and it will not be built by human hands. It will be built entirely on faith. This is not a story about getting whatever you want if you just believe hard enough. It is the story of God tearing down a massive barrier so that the whole world can finally come near. 40 years later, in the year 70, the Roman army would march into Jerusalem. They would dismantle the temple piece by piece, throwing the massive stones down into the valley below. The physical mountain of the old system would be entirely leveled. The shadow passed away. The reality had come. But this brings us to the final, most piercing layer of the story. If the fig tree was a warning to the temple, and the physical temple is now gone, what does the tree mean for us today? Because the fruit God was looking for in Jerusalem is the exact same fruit he is looking for now. We started with a story that seemed impulsive, erratic, and out of character. A tired, hungry teacher passing judgment on a tree for simply acting like a tree. But by tracing the ancient pattern of the prophets, a confusing miracle has transformed into one of the most profound warnings in all of Scripture. Jesus was not just a traveler looking for a meal. He was acting as the Lord of the covenant. He was stepping into the ancient words of Hosea, Jeremiah, and Micah. He was walking up to the religious establishment of his day, inspecting the branches, and looking for the exact same fruit God has always desired. When he found only the illusion of life, he passed a structural, final judgment. The physical temple in Jerusalem fell. The stones were thrown down into the valley, exactly as Jesus predicted. The old shadow gave way to the new reality. But the warning of the fig tree did not die in the first century. It did not disappear when the Roman army dismantled the Mount Zion complex in the year 70. The warning is just as urgent today, because the New Testament introduces a massive theological shift. The Apostle Paul, writing just a few decades after the resurrection, tells the early Christians that God has not stopped building a temple. He has simply relocated it. In his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, Paul writes, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? The temple is no longer a massive building of stone and gold in the Middle East. It is the human heart. And that means the warning of the fig tree is now directed at us. It is incredibly easy to build a life that looks vibrant and green from the outside. We can cultivate all the leaves of religious performance. We can attend the services, sing the songs, read the right books, and use the correct theological vocabulary. We can build our own modern courtyards, filling our lives with endless Christian podcasts, debates, conferences, and activities. We can look completely healthy from a distance, but leaves can be deceptive. They can advertise a life that does not actually exist underneath. When the Lord walks up to the branches of our lives, He is not easily impressed by the noise of our schedules. He is not fooled by the size of our foliage. He is looking beneath the leaves. He is looking for the substance. And the Apostle Paul tells us exactly what that substance looks like. In Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, Paul writes, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." Notice what is missing from that list. Paul does not say the fruit of the Spirit is perfect church attendance. He does not say it is a flawless theology, a massive ministry platform, or a busy calendar of religious events. Those things are not necessarily bad, but they are leaves. And leaves without fruit are exactly what Jesus judged on the road to Jerusalem. The fruit God is looking for is the actual, quiet, deep transformation of the human heart. It is a life that is slowly, steadily becoming more like Jesus. It is a life that produces justice for the vulnerable, mercy for the broken, and genuine love for the neighbor. Jesus cursing the fig tree was an act of grace. It is a severe grace, but it is grace. It is a timeless reminder that God desires reality over ritual. He wants the roots of our lives planted so deeply in His love that we naturally produce the fruit of His kingdom. If this study has helped you read the Gospels with fresh eyes, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue uncovering the deeper patterns of Scripture together. The miracle on the road to Jerusalem was never a random moment of anger, and the fig tree was never just a tree. It was a mirror held up to the human heart.